It's my pleasure to welcome Jim up on stage to share the Word of God with us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So I am part of the Everybody Gets to Preach at Arise Church program. Sign-up sheet will be going around here shortly. You can get your spot in line if you'd like to do that. I found out this morning I need to be careful a little bit about my humor here. I walked up to Kerry earlier and he said, "So those 27 slides are yours?" And I was like, I didn't have any slides, but I thought he was joking. And I said, "Well, no, I have the 3 videos that go along with that too." And he went, 3 videos? I didn't hear about 3 videos. And I was like, oh, no, that's just a joke. That was just, I think I may have had something to do with having trouble finding the video earlier. I'm not sure about that. It's good to be with you this morning. I am humbled, honestly, by the invitation to speak. It is a joy for me to do this. We made the move to Oregon, Ann and I, back in October, and followed the breadcrumbs of my grandchildren up here in order to get here. 24 years in Phoenix. We were church planners there, moved from Indianapolis to go there. And I got to tell you, and honestly, no offense, I hate to get started on the wrong foot here, but what I found out is that Oregonians have a little bit of trouble with the truth. They said it never snows in Oregon. And so we moved here on the assumption that it never snows in Oregon. I have shoveled snow now twice since I've been here, and I'm not overly happy about that. Okay. We left Indiana. I can see it's raining again here. There are sometimes it rains here, and I think you people don't even count it as rain. You know, I was walking into Walmart. This was soon after we moved here. I was walking into Walmart. It was blue sky, the sun was out, and it was raining. And I said to the guy standing there was a guy standing out there selling something. And I said, "Is this what it's like? Is it that it just rains?" And he's like, "What are you talking about rain? We don't even count this as rain. It's just constantly damp here." But when we left Phoenix, I thought, we're 24 years in one place. It's time for a change. It's time to be unique. Maybe be a little different, stand out in the crowd a little bit. So the first thing I did when I came to Oregon, I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to buy a flannel shirt. And then I thought, well, okay, that didn't make me stand out very much. How about if I grow a beard? You know how many guys there are with white hair and beards in this place? There are a few of us around. But when we moved, my poor wife, Ann, has had to go. She has known we've been married for 42 years. By the way, let me pause here for just a second. This has nothing to do with what I want to talk about today, okay? Little of this does. Gary, I met Gary this morning. Actually, Gary and I have met before, and we stood back there, and Gary told me his story. And it's Judy, right? Gary and Judy. And Gary and Judy have been married for 64 years. And I was like, man, that is 22 years longer that I've been married. And I just hope and pray, first of all, that Ann and I still have 22 years left together, and maybe more than that. That would be wonderful. I don't know if Ann thinks that, but that would be wonderful for me, for us to have that time together. But Gary told me his story. 15 years old, he was playing Babe Ruth baseball. I don't know where this was. Where were you? Okay, so here in Oregon. And a friend of his said, hey, I know a place where you can go and meet some girls. And it was the local youth group. And so he went to the youth group and went through the whole evening, I guess, and they were going to do personal testimonies at the end of it. He said, I'm getting out of here because I don't want anything to do with that. He was not a Christian at the time. And so he was starting to go out, and all I can think is this young, sweet voice behind him said, hey, Gary, thanks for coming tonight. It was really great to have you here. Maybe you should come to church sometime. And that was Judy. And that started, well, that was the very seeds of 64 years of not only being married, but of walking with Jesus as well. What a story, right? The power of story in our lives, and the way that God uses people in our lives to not only bring us to Him, but also to fulfill our hearts. I really appreciated you telling me that. That was just beautiful. Where was I? Let's see, Anne. Oh yeah, my poor wife, Anne. It's amazing how often I use those words together. My poor wife, Anne. I've been a pastor for 42 years. This is really pretty much as long as we've been married. We moved to Oregon. I haven't had to choose where we were going to church since I was a senior in college. That's been a little while ago, right? Because I've been a pastor, and I pastored a church an associate pastor in Ohio, and pastored a church in Indiana. We church planted in Arizona, and Anne, of course, has been along for the ride in that, and been an integral part of all of that. But she has had to listen to the same preacher for 42 years, this poor woman. And finally, we came to a place that really had nothing to do with me pastoring a church at all, and I was like, really, you should get to choose where we go to church, because you have not had the chance to do that in a very long time. And Scotty was friends with my son Luke, and so Ann came over I was actually back in Phoenix at work, and she came over and fell in love with you guys and brought me here, and I've done the same, and it has just been, it's been kind of like coming home. It's been very good. And we got a lot to learn about each other, and you don't know me very well, and we're still getting to know you, but we are thrilled both to be in Oregon, out of the desert, and where it's green, and to be a part of. My heart beats for church plants and for what God does in a setting like this, because I think there's something really special that God does in this kind of a group. And so you should be thrilled to be here. We are thrilled to be here, and are glad to be making this home. Have you tracked at all with we prayed about this a month or so ago, with what's been going on at Asbury University in Kentucky? The renewal of God's Spirit, the outpouring of God's Spirit, the renewal of these kids' hearts. I teach, Ann and I both teach at Grand Canyon University, or did, and I'm still teaching some online, but my heart I love hanging around college kids. And one of the guys that I mentored down at Grand Canyon is attending seminary at Asbury. And so I've been texting him, while all this is going on. And I'm like, hey, are you involved in this? Are you worshiping? Are you part of the group that's there? And he's texting back and said, oh, you would not believe it, Jim. You would not believe what's going on here. And they moved it off campus, and it continues to grow. And we are seeing in that just one of the most powerful outpourings of God's Spirit that we have seen in a long time in our country. And I don't think it's any coincidence that the movie The Jesus Revolution has come out right in the middle of all of this, which chronicles another major outpouring of God's Spirit in this country, maybe one of the greatest awakenings that we outside, maybe in rivaling the great awakenings of the early years of our country, where God had just, in the 1970s, through this group of hippies, and every time I say that, I gotta laugh because it just makes me chuckle, this group of hippies in SoCal, that God moves in these people and in a pastor there, and it begins a movement of God's Spirit that spreads like wildfire across this country in the late 60s and early 70s, all the way from what was happening in Laguna Beach, California, in that area, all the way to this little town in western Pennsylvania called Johnstown. I know you will find this difficult to believe, but I was alive in the late 60s and early 70s. Why are you laughing at that? Okay, all right. And the, oh man, the passion, the fervor, our hearts coming alive as a result of what God was doing in us in that time. Man, so I had a friend of mine, a coworker of mine called me and said, hey, would you go to the movie with me? And I got to tell you, I'm just a little skeptical about some Christian movies, never quite sure. I don't think the quality is just quite as good as I would like to see it at times, in communicating the gospel of Jesus. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll go with you to this movie. And I went, and all of a sudden, as it started to tell the story, all of these memories and emotions and the experience that I had as a kid. I mean, in 1969, I was 13 years old. And those are my high school years were caught up in this movement of Jesus in our country, in my life. And the music, Reuben, where you at, Reuben? Yeah, Reuben, yeah, right. Oh, yeah, there you are. That was the birthplace of contemporary Christian worship, was in that time. Love song. How many of you have seen the movie? Oh, wow. You know what I loved about the movie? Two things, spoiler alerts kind of thing. One was first of all, just Chuck Smith was pastoring this church, and he was bored and depressed, and all of a sudden God's Spirit and the joy that came over this man. But the second thing that I really loved was Pirates Cove near Laguna Beach, the thousands upon thousands of baptisms that happened in the ocean there. And I sat there and wept in the theater as I experienced that kind of movement again. Larry Norman, Phil Keaggy, Randy Stonehill, second chapter of Acts. Is this resonating with anybody, or is this just me? This is my heritage. Rich Mullins. There were these Jesus festivals popped up all over the country. They were like to rival Woodstock. 10,000 high school and college kids gathering at farms across our nation to worship God, to honor Jesus, to lift him up. It's the same kind of thing that's happening at Asbury now. It was a time when God was just at work in his life. Anybody know what this meant? Yeah, it was not we're number one, okay? It was not that. What was it, Kim? Yeah, one way, right? There was the rallying cry of my generation. One way to Jesus. This was who we are. This was what expressed our hearts. One of the things that came out of that for me was at some point along the way, I was listening to some preacher speak, and he put in my hand a small cross. Now, it was metal back in the time, I think. Not that it has turned into wood in that time, but this is a different one. It looks very similar to that up there, actually. And the reason he gave it to us was so that we would be constantly reminded of what it is that Jesus did for us on the cross, of the love that God poured out into our lives, all the ways that God's love was expressed to us in Jesus on the cross. He gave it to us so that we would carry it around with us. And every time we stuck our hands in our pocket, we would be reminded that this is who we were committed to, that we were absolutely 100% all in, sold out, that this was our heart, that we were followers of Jesus, and that nothing was going to move us from that. And I put that thing in my pocket, and I carried it around for years at the time, and that this was a constant reminder of who we are. And out of that, too, to go right along with that, my life verse from that time period. I don't know, have you ever done this? Do you have a life verse? My life verse from that time period, it's changed since then, but my life verse from that time period was Galatians chapter 2, verse 20. Carrie? Where it says, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. And the life I now live in the body, I got to see what version of this we have up here. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness could be gained through the law, then Christ died for nothing. This is where I want us to sit for a few minutes here this morning. I sometimes think we think about Paul as kind of an intellectual, an academic. That if we had to define him, we read his letters, they're very theologically slanted. They're filled with, logical arguments for faith and Jesus. And even here in the book of Galatians, what Paul is doing is he's laying out this argument about the grace of God and how we came to Jesus by grace. It had nothing to do with us, that it had nothing to do with what I could bring to the table, none of my own works. I couldn't be good enough in order to be part of the family of God, to be considered a child of God. There was nothing I could do, Paul says. And he says, so it was God's grace that did all of this, right? That it was all of God, what God does for us in Jesus. But then there were these people called the Judaizers in Galatia who were trying to say, yeah, it's okay to come to Jesus by faith and grace, but then you've got to go back to keeping the law. You've got to go back to trying to please God yourself. And if you don't do all the right things, for them it was if you aren't circumcised, if you aren't following the traditions, if you aren't obeying the law, then he said, if you don't do those things, then you could still be rejected by God. And Paul is like, guys, how could you even think that, knowing what God's already said? He's laying out all of this logical truth. And I sometimes think we just see Paul this way. I have a bunch of, I don't know why this is, but I seem to attract engineers into my life. Are any of you engineers? Oh my goodness. Woo. Very logical people. We'll see if this describes any of you, okay? Here are the engineers. These are of course just the engineers I know, okay? And I'm sure this doesn't apply to you. Very logical, kind of unemotional. Very intellectual in their thinking, Might I say maybe just a little awkward socially, maybe just a little, the guys I know, and I think we think that Paul was a lot like that he was, that he never could relate to what we went through. And yet what I see here is something completely different in Paul. he lays out this logical argument. He is just like my engineering friends. He is putting down in logical terms for us this argument, theological argument that we need to understand about our faith. But he comes here and the pronouns all change, and all of a sudden he's talking about his heart. And when he's talking about the grace, I think he is just overwhelmed by what God has done for him and what he has made him. I have been crucified with Christ. And it's no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life that I now live in the flesh, I live still by faith in the Son of God. It hasn't changed. I'm still living by grace and faith. And then he says, these words that I just think are the heart cry of Paul, who loved me and gave himself for me. And I got to tell you, when I first read that, I was like, this is what I want my heart to be. I want to have this kind of deep, moving understanding of what it is that Christ has done, that I myself have been crucified with Christ. The old nature has been taken by Jesus to the cross, and it's no longer I who live. I'm still alive. I'm still, walking around in this world, but it's not me anymore. It's not Jim Miller anymore, who is the animated person walking through this world. It is Christ who lives in me. Christ has taken possession. Christ has come to dwell in me. Christ is the one who lives in me. And the life that I am living now in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. And I could just picture Paul as he's writing this, the tears just streaming down his face because he is so caught up in the grace of God in his life and that God loves him. Have you had that kind of experience with the love of God for you? For you. Have you said at some point along the way in your journey with Jesus, oh my goodness, he loves me? See, I would have expected Paul in his very logical way, his very academic way, to come along and say, yes, we have been crucified with Christ, but we all live, but Christ lives in us, and he loves us, and he gave himself for us, but he doesn't. And I don't want to rush by this. Would you just say that with me? We're going to say this: Jesus, you love me. Jesus, you gave yourself for me. I don't know if you need to close your eyes to do this or not. Put Jesus there beside you, whatever you need to do. But say this with me: Jesus, you love me, okay? Just say it like you're overwhelmed by this. Jesus, you love me. Jesus, you gave yourself for me, for Scotty, for Kim, for Carrie, for Gary. You gave yourself for me. I think every time we celebrate communion like we did today, that ought to be what we're saying. We take the bread, we take the cup, we remember the sacrifice of Jesus. He is there on the cross for us. He is giving himself for us. He is at work on our behalf. Jesus, you did this for me. You gave yourself for me. I want you to take a minute. Usually at the very end of this, we're getting close to the end of this, but usually at the very end of this, we divide up into groups. I want you to take just a quick minute. I want you to get into a small group, and I want you to ask this question. On the cross, what are the aspects of God's love that we see there? When we look at Jesus and we say, you did this for me, you gave yourself for me. When we look at Jesus on the cross, giving himself for us, what is it about God's love that we see there? Okay, and just give you an example. One of the things we might see there is the forgiveness of God, right? That's an aspect of God's love, a facet of God's love. When we got engaged, Ann and I gave her a diamond, which is kind of normal, right? And I remember and we still do this today at times. We'll be sitting in a restaurant that's just the right light, and we'll take her ring and we'll hold it under the light, you know? Anybody do this? Hold it under the light, and all of the different facets, the way it sparkles, and you see all the different elements. That's what I want you to do here. I want you to think about all that Christ expresses for you on the cross. Go, do that now, okay? You don't have much time, do it quickly, come up with all the words that you can think of that you see in Jesus on the cross that he has done for you because he loves you and gave himself for you. "30 seconds. All right, I know that's not very long, but let me pull you back together. I know we could do this. That's a topic you could mine very deeply. Throw out some of the words for me that you used about the facets of Christ's love for you on the cross. What are some of the words you used? Generosity, long-suffering, humility, sacrificial, love, heartbreak, mercy. What was that over here too? We got the movement of the Holy Spirit. We got them together. What was that? Perfect sacrifice. Anything else? Other words? Yeah. What was it? Freedom. Yeah. On the cross, and man, I encourage you to take some time just to sit in this for a while, just because I think it's important for, especially this time of year, it's Palm Sunday, to sit at the foot of the cross of Jesus and to remember again all the different things that he expresses there for us, what he does for us on the cross, his grace, that he gives us what we don't deserve, his mercy, that he doesn't give us what we do deserve, his sacrifice, his forgiveness, his compassion. That just, every time I use that word about the cross, it speaks to me about the heart of Jesus for me. His desire for us to be children of God, to be in his family, his, some of the other ones, generosity and freedom, and all of these different things that on the cross of Christ, as I put my hand on my pocket and my cross isn't there anymore, all the things that we see in the cross of Jesus, all these different ways that he has expressed the love of God for us on the cross, we ought to be moved by that. We ought to be challenged by that. We ought to be filled to overflowing with gratefulness for that, right? But I want you to see one more thing about this. I was praying through this passage just recently with my people from work. I gather 3 different times a day with 100 or so people, with the people that I work with, and we do a Zoom prayer time together. And we were praying through this verse, and I was praying through it. I said, I've been crucified with Christ, and it's no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. In fact, what I want to do, we were praying through this, and I just felt like God just kind of said, here's what I want you to see in this, Jim. Let me read for you the way this is in the Greek. And I just justified 7 years of education for you there, okay? It just makes all that money worthwhile, okay? So in the Greek, here's the way that it reads, okay? This is the flow. We have to rearrange Greek because it doesn't fit with our English sentencing. But here's the way it flows. With Christ, I have been crucified. He lives. Now I lost my place. He lives. I no longer live, but Christ in me. Actually, it's but in me, Christ. With Christ, I have been crucified. He lives. I no longer live, but in me, Christ. And as I was praying through this, what I began to see was this, that I have been crucified. And whenever Paul uses that phrasing, generally what he means is that my old nature, that part of me that was still bound up in sin, that was still influenced by sin, controlled by sin, and really the best word to describe who I am outside of Christ, besides being dead, because that's a great word to describe it, but the other word that is a good word to describe it is self. It was all about me, okay? That outside of Christ, we are, and this is a really great buzzword in our culture today, we are all narcissists, okay? It is all about ourself. It is about what I want and my needs and my rights and the things that I deserve to get from you. And I am going to do, our culture tells us this all the time, that this is what we have to be focused on, what we're going to get out of life and what our lives are supposed to be like and how we need to grasp everything that we deserve in life, okay? Self. And Paul comes along and he says, you, however, have been crucified with Christ. The self has been taken to the cross. It's been nailed there with Jesus. You have been set free from self. You have been set free from having to pursue your own rights and your own needs. You have been set free from the slavery that we have to our own desires and our own needs, and instead you have been crucified. You no longer live, and instead now Christ lives through you. Christ lives through you, okay? All those things that you talked about Jesus on the cross, all those aspects about Jesus and what he did on the cross and what we see on the cross, how many of those were for his own benefit? Yeah, say zero, right? None of them. Jesus didn't go to the cross for himself. He went to the cross, for who? Who loved me and gave himself for me, and his grace and mercy and forgiveness and kindness and compassion and goodness and all the things that we see in Jesus, he did for us. And now that same Jesus went to the cross to live into the lives of others. Let's put it that way, okay? He goes to the cross for you, for me. He lives and dies into our lives, bringing us everything that we need. And now Paul says, I have been crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live, but Christ now living through me. And the word lives there is not a word that means he just has come alive or he just dwells, he's taken up residence in me. It is a word that means he is actively living out. He is doing life in the world, okay? He is living, acting, speaking through you. That when Jesus expresses love and kindness and compassion and goodness and acceptance and humility and a servant's heart, when he expresses those on the cross to us, now what I want you to see is that these are the same things that you are to be living into the lives of others. How many of you have ever had trouble forgiving someone? Yeah, I appreciate your willingness to put your hands up. It's amazing the kinds of things you can ask and get people to answer when you're up here doing this kind of thing, you know. Let's bare your souls for a minute here. It's hard, right? Forgiveness is a difficult thing. And some of us are really good at being grudge keepers, aren't we? But what if we said about, the person that we have trouble forgiving, instead of saying, Jesus, would you help me forgive that person? We said, Jesus, would you forgive that person through me? You are living through me. This is of a paradigm shift for me, I think, that Jesus is actually alive and living through me into the life of others. And that the things that I find difficult to do in my flesh, that Jesus can do in him because that's who he is, and he is working through me into the lives of others. I need to wrap this up. Luke is going to help me. I have something for you. This is my son Luke, who was our impetus to move up here. I have a little cross for all of you, all right? Little pocket cross. Actually, this has a little hole in it too. If you wanted to hang it from your around your neck too, you could do that. But I want to give you this as a way of not just reminding you of what it is that Jesus has done for you on the cross on this Palm Sunday. Of all the things that Jesus has accomplished on your behalf in this Palm Sunday, of all the ways that he has expressed love to you today, but everything that we see in Jesus, that whenever you feel this cross in your pocket, if you're willing to do that, you will think, what Jesus did for me, he is living through me to do into the lives of others. that self has been put away, that all of my direction, all of my attention, that it is no longer my needs that are the important thing. It is no longer my wants and my rights that are the important thing. It is, everything is wrapped up in the other now, because that's who Jesus is. Everything is wrapped up in how can I serve? How can I lay down my life? How can I go to the cross and live through the cross into... Do you ever wonder why Jesus says, if you want to be my disciples, what's he say? Deny yourself, take up your cross, live into the lives of others, die into the lives of others, and follow me. That's what I believe following Jesus is about. So, Father, as we come to you on this Palm Sunday, and the act of Christ is so fresh in our hearts today, the desire for you to be our Father and for us to be your child, and that you loved me. You loved Jim, and you gave Jesus yourself for me. As we are overwhelmed by that truth, as we are immersed in your love afresh, Father, I pray that we will also see that this is now the life that we live into others as well. The love of the cross is the love that we are to share and to live into others. And I pray that, Jesus, in your name.